JRPGs are a genre that I pride myself on having lots of knowledge and love for. So much so that I tend to make videos just like these and share them with random people on the internet to spark conversation and hopefully joy. One of the series that's always had me in a headlock is Final Fantasy. I have played almost every single Final Fantasy title available in the US. I'm talking rhythm and mobile games all the way to Final Fantasy XVI. The only one that I never really got around to, funny enough, was a mainline title, the very game this video is based on, Final Fantasy XIII. Spoiler warning really quickly, this game is turning 16 years old this year, and if you're like me and haven't touched this title, I'd proceed with caution as I'm going to be dropping some spoilers. With most of that out of the way, enjoy the video. Final Fantasy XIII was released on December 17th, 2009 in Japan, and March 9th, 2010 in the US for Xbox 360 and PS3. Keep in mind, when this game was released in 2010, I was only 11 years old. I grew up playing all sorts of video games, JRPGs, shooters, fighting games, I played them all. At this time, I'd only really played a few Final Fantasies, one of them being Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles for the GameCube, Final Fantasy VII, and Final Fantasy VIII. Now at 11, I can't say that I played through each of these games with a great depth or understood the entire plot. I can actually guarantee that I did no such thing. But I did love playing these games. This was a little before I ended up owning an Xbox, which was around late 2011, early 2012. So I had no means of playing Final Fantasy XIII at this time, so I didn't pay too much attention to it for myself. I should have said this from the start of the video, but I wanted to clarify. At this point in time, now, in 2025, while I have been making this video, I have not yet played 13.2 or 13.3 just yet. So I won't go too in depth on the entire series as I want to experience them as a whole before I give my final take. I was a kid who had a lot of friends growing up, but spent a lot of my time on the internet and playing lots of video games rather with my friends or on my own. While spending my time online, I would always find places where people would talk about video games. Rather YouTube or online forums where I would find 30-year-old men yelling at each other because they didn't like the same game. I grew up surrounded by gamers. My mom has 4 younger brothers, and they all played games growing up, and I would watch them. 2 of them, being twins, were only about 10 to 11 years older than me, so I watched them play more than the other 2. I would easily say that those 2 are a really big part of why I am in the hobbies that I am today. But enough about my background. Once Final Fantasy XIII launched, it was met with some pretty heavy criticism. Criticism that poisoned me to stay away from the title for so long. I'm not one to usually let reviews or people telling me not to play a game usually stop me, but the amount of hate this game got was insane to me. The Final Fantasy community is, how do I say this, picky at times for a lack of a better phrase. I've seen people fight over which Final Fantasy is the best all my life. Easy answer, it's 7, but not very often do I see a majority agree on anything other than which Final Fantasy is the worst. The 2 names you'll see tossed around for the worst mainline title is Final Fantasy VIII and Final Fantasy XIII. These 2 titles have hate mobs that would strike you down even if you attempt to say these were your favorite, or better yet, that they were the best in the series with your own opinion. If you're new to the whole Final Fantasy XIII hate or saga, I'm going to briefly touch it here and we'll go over a little bit later in the video. The biggest issue that would be tossed around immediately when this game was talked about is how the game was a hallway simulator. What that basically meant was that for a good chunk of the game, you were pretty much in a linear setting, walking through a lot of narrow pathways or inside of buildings that weren't fully open like maybe the other Final Fantasy games were. There weren't a lot of lush cities that you could explore or too many NPCs that you could sit down and talk to, making some locations feel pretty empty. The other major pain point for a lot of people was the gameplay. I'm not going to dive into it right now, but instead just give you a taste of where this video will be heading. I do want to say this though. If you are a fan from the Trilogy series, and have been since day one, I applaud you for standing so strong. I notice you and see what you all had to go through. So what brought me to finally try this game out? After 16 years of hearing how bad this game was, why in 2025 am I playing Final Fantasy XIII? That is a very good question, with a bit of an odd answer. It was actually the Steam Deck. I'm a really busy person, and when I added YouTube to my plate, it only made me busier. I'm on the go a lot, with having kids, a beautiful fiance, and work. Even if it's just me being upstairs in the living room with my family, I don't have much time just to sit down and play the games like I used to, or really want to. Especially a title that isn't on all current major platforms. The Steam Deck was something that I could finally play on the go that allowed me to get to most of my backlog. I really do enjoy my time with it, but I'm not here to sell you on getting a Steam Deck, so I'll let the other people do that on YouTube. I had Final Fantasy XIII in my Steam library from so long ago, and just said screw it and started playing it. Now when I tell you I had little to no information on this game earlier, I meant it. All I know is the hate that it received and still gets to this day. I had no clue what was going to happen. I know some of the characters' names, but not really any of the story beats. It was truly a fresh entry for me. When I started my journey to Final Fantasy XIII, I was pretty sucked in. It gave me very similar bombing opening mission vibes with Saz and Lightning having to fight their way off the train and moving around Cocoon. The combat system was something to get used to. I expected for things to feel different, as I did hear a bit about the paradigm system and how a lot of people didn't like the auto battle. I ended up staying away from auto battle for most of my playthrough to give me as much control as possible. To be honest, the combat system at first wasn't my favorite thing. It took a bit to get used to, as it wasn't something that's very common in other JRPG titles. It gave me similar vibes to Xenoblade, but even then it was extremely different at the same time. As I started to understand the different roles and how important they are to which characters, and when to use them, I started to really let the wind pick up the sails and take flight. It wasn't nearly as bad as everyone had to make it out to be. Sure, I didn't have full control over the party, but that didn't hinder me too much. The AI really surprised me. For a 2009 game, I would give it a command that I wanted to use as a role, and it would go to work and was pretty optimal at times. I'm sure others out there have their own playthrough stories of how the AI messed them up, but it was pretty different for me and it felt great. In all, the gameplay was not terrible, and I actually found myself enjoying it the more and more I got used to it and mastering it when pulling certain roles. I think this game had the same flaw Final Fantasy VIII did, and that was change, specifically to the battle system. Listen, Final Fantasy gamers don't like change, let alone a big change like the paradigm system. The Crystarium felt oddly familiar. Again, going into this, I had no idea what I was in for. I finally put my finger on it, and I saw so much of a comparison between the system that we have now in Final Fantasy VII Remake Trilogy. I know that Hamaguchi worked on both those games and is now the director of the remake series, so it just made sense why these games felt a little similar in that aspect. One of the first things that started to get to me when I started playing was the verbiage they were using right out of the gate of the game. Words I was not used to seeing or hearing, like fal'Cie or l'Cie. They kept saying these words over and over again right from the start, and I had no clue what they were talking about. I sort of just pushed through it up until the first boss fight and took a break to do some research on what was actually going on. What's a fal'Cie? Are they evil? What is actually going on? If you're unsure, I'll also give my best understanding. fal'Cies are gods, or I guess strong deities that reside in both locations. You have the fal'Cie that live in Cocoon, and pulse fal'Cies who inhabit Pulse, which is a land below the floating colony of Cocoon. They have very different abilities and go around choosing different humans to do their bidding, also known as their focus. That's all great and dandy though, but this is what brings us to what is a l'Cie. A l'Cie is a little bit easier to digest. A l'Cie is a human that a fal'Cie chooses to do their bidding by giving the person ability to use magic and a focus that they must complete or they'll be turned into a Cie'th. A Cie'th is practically a l'Cie who never finished their focus in time and never tried. A Cie'th is practically a l'Cie who never finished their focus in the time frame, or just never tried to finish it. They become a mindless monster of sorts. Are you still with me here? We're almost done, I promise. The only issue with being a l'Cie is you don't know what your focus is. I should probably explain to you what a focus is. Essentially, it is just an action or bidding that a fal'Cie will give you that you have to complete in a certain amount of time. There could be a quick blip once it randomly chooses you in your brain, other than that, good luck. Once I started reading, I was hooked. I was so entranced with the ideology of fal'Cies and l'Cies once I started to learn more about them and sort of what this all meant. This was something I had to go out of my way to learn about, though. The only other option was reading about the gist of them in the data blog that gets updated during your adventure. I understand being confused if you were just doing your first playthrough and wasn't really confident in what exactly all those terms meant. And for the people who are still here, I'm sorry to hear my amazing explanation of that, as I'm sure most of you probably already know what that meant. The characters were pretty great as well. I know there's a lot of lightning hate and vanille hate out there, but I thought they were both really great characters in their own right. The story was amazing. I loved every single second of it. There was so much going on for each of the characters and so much character growth moving along the main plot. Every single character in this game had their own reasons for wanting to fight other than just being a l'Cie. Hope losing his mother and having to face the real world and fighting through adversity, or Lightning having to face her past that scars her and being there for her party. These are just two small moments that happen throughout your adventure with the cast of characters. The dynamic between the party feels like a Final Fantasy game at its heart, something newer titles of the series have a hard time doing today. I forgot to mention, but holy mother of God, does this game still look good. The FMVs that play in this game are so good looking it blew me away. While I was going through this game, I kept saying to myself over and over again, how did this game get so much hate? Listen, some of the critiques are valid. Sure, some of the rooms are just hallways, but being linear is okay. It does not take away from what Square served us with this game. This entire game is about free will, breaking away from the molds even if it looks hopeless. A timeless message that I still stand behind every step of the way. This game did not deserve to be considered one of the worst Final Fantasies ever made. In no world after completing this game did I ever think, man, this was a bad game. Can it be a little rough sometimes? Sure. I'm gonna open my big mouth here, and I may regret this in the comment section, but if we're gonna say this is the worst Final Fantasy ever because of linear aspects or whatever else, we better be putting Final Fantasy X right next to it. I said it. I know how the fanbase is, and I know how the fanbase loves to say Final Fantasy X is one of the best. I completely disagree. Final Fantasy X is just as linear, yet I hear no one wanting to burn down villages because of it. With Final Fantasy XIII, I didn't even come close to cringing as much as I did hearing the voice acting for Final Fantasy X for the first time. I think Final Fantasy XIII is a game that deserves more love and is such an amazing title, and I would easily put it in my top 5 Final Fantasy games of all time. With me being ever so controversial, I will bring this to an end. I loved my time with this game and cannot wait to keep moving on with the trilogy. I read that the other 2 titles for this series really fleshed out the gameplay and other quality of life updates. Let me know how you guys feel in the comments. Or you can tell me how much you hate me in the comments because of my Final Fantasy X comment. I'm totally okay with that as well. If nothing else, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.